Scooch. It's Q&A Friday. Today, we're talking about whether your accounting firm ought to sell like a health check, to suss out what's under the couch cushions before you agree to help that client. What's my gear setup? I'm spilling the beans. How to find good outsourcing groups to work with, because goodness knows we get spammed by a lot every day. And books. I got a stack of books in here. I got a ton of books in my office. I'll cruise through some of the favorites that I've read recently. And maybe you can share a few of your own faves. Come on in, open up a cold one. It's Q&A Friday. How do we feel about those shows? The whole this, where the bit of the show is that you're drunk or you're high now. I feel like there's an increasing number of those shows where that's just the bit. Is we're gonna do this pretty normal thing, but be super not sober. I feel like that's fun for a couple episodes, and then you're like, I gotta get a job. Okay, first question came via DM, so I won't share who it was. What are your thoughts on tax practice having a formalized, with a fee, onboarding process that's sold as a health check for their business? I've heard of bookkeepers doing this. You can run through a list of things to look at, clean up, correct, gather, verify, etc. Give them a health status report or something similar at the end. Even if you find nothing, they get peace of mind. I'd probably limit onboarding to pre-tax season only, as it'd be time consuming. I've run into a couple of messes now after onboarding the clients in November. Basically required a whole bunch of extra work. Whether you're a tax firm or a bookkeeping firm, I'm a big advocate of the first work that you do for somebody not be this perceived ongoing relationship. And a health check or something before signing an engagement letter to say, I'm gonna do this tax return or your monthly closes for you or something like that. I think it's totally worth doing. A couple things to keep in mind. If this health check is framed as quote unquote onboarding, then you're still kind of committing to serving them on an ongoing basis. Whether you find some dead bodies in there or not. Oftentimes you do this, whatever form this health check takes, and you're like, had I only known, I would not want to work with this person. So I think you still want to give yourself that out. So definitely valuable to have a compartmentalized thing that I'm going to do with you before committing to working with you. Now, if you're on the client side, framed the wrong way, this can almost feel like a penalty or like a one-off onboarding fee that they don't want to pay, and they may go somewhere else and the person's like, oh, I won't make you pay that. So you want to think about the messaging and the framing of what that looks like. Is it ultimately something that's valuable to that person? And this is where I think you can actually get creative in what you dress up that health check as. The more specific type of person you serve, the easier it will be to find that thing that will be exciting or meaningful to them. If you run a tax firm, the low-hanging fruit here is we're going to run an analysis of past years to see if you left any money on the table or if things were done correctly. And I can tell you, accountants are bad at marketing, but I can tell you if we had actually tracked the clients that we onboarded and the number who we ended up going back and amending returns and the net tax savings, didn't happen every time. Maybe 25 to 40% of new clients we would go back and amend something. But say you onboarded 10 clients in a quarter and 2 clients saved $5,000 each. Sweet. On average, last quarter, clients saved $500 in tax doing this study, and we corrected their reporting. Being able to frame it as this is a thing that needs to be done either way, because technically the change could go either direction, but on a whole, it's usually a money-saving affair for our clients. That's medicine that's going to go down a little bit easier. We did a main channel video on this maybe 6 months ago, but I really go a step even further removed from that, where I would rather build an accounting firm around an offer that is a standalone project, where in the course of doing this project, I learn everything that I would otherwise learn doing a quote unquote health check. But this standalone project has value and is something they are happy to pay for. It's the thing that I used to attract them in the first place, and a thing that says, I deeply understand what your issues are, beekeeper. So that initial health check, my framing for that is more of an offer. And that offer is what I build my landing page around, how I attract people, what I talk about when I go on podcasts and that sort of thing. And people see that I'm an accountant, they can probably read between the lines and assume that I do these other things. But my main goals with this offer, this health check, whatever you want to call it, is three things. One, create something that will attract people in greater volumes than just saying, I do accounting or I do tax. There are more sexy things that we can do for people than just that around, for example, reviewing their app stack to eliminate a bunch of redundancies and help them develop better integrations, stuff like that. Maybe it's like a compliance review for a specific industry where maybe compliance is a real headache. That offer, I think, can actually attract more people than just accounting and tax copy. And you can even still have the accounting and tax copy and attract all the same people you would have otherwise, but this offer, I think, attracts even more people. Second reason I like it is it can be a proof of my expertise within a specific domain. How many people in the US can say, we are US tax pros and we're going to do great work for you? It's every single tax firm. Like, you're not reducing you're not separating yourself from the herd in any way by just going out and saying, we do tax, or we'll review your prior year tax returns. My goal is to say, we do this for small private charter companies, And that offer, that standalone offer, is a way to signal that you have a deep understanding of a problem that's very specific to them. So that's the second reason why I love that. The third reason is it completely changes the game when it comes to then engaging them for ongoing services. The way that 95% of firms engage clients today is a client knows nothing about them, they have a couple meetings, and now they're full-blown clients. What I want to do is I want to do this initial project with them and have them be pumped about working with the people that they got to interact with over the course of that project, be really impressed by our expertise, have an amazing experience so that when it comes time to seal the deal on ongoing services, they can't imagine working with anybody else. And at that point, you're talking about people coming in at, pick a number, 2x the rates, 20% more of the rates. Either way, it is all the same work you would have otherwise done, but that additional value they assign to what you do because they appreciate your expertise, that is all going straight to the bottom line. So I'm a big fan of projects that precede doing the ongoing work, whatever you frame that as. A few weeks back, I think we talked about this on the pod, and the framing was kind of like what most accounting websites are getting wrong and how it's costing them money. Because everybody's accounting websites are like, I do accounting, I do tax, rather than here's an offer, a really high converting offer that you would be dumb to say no to. It's that good of an offer. That's how you get them in the door. That's how you effectively do the health check to know that you actually want to work with them longer term. But then when it comes to engaging them in perpetuity, they're like, oh my gosh, this is the firm for me. They know way more, so they're willing to pay more. They're willing to trust your expertise and all that. Hey, the annual Accounting High tournament bracket challenge thing started. If you don't know what that is, it's put on a group called the Accounting High. They've got a podcast. They do like education for accountants. Each year they do what can only be described as a popularity contest for all of the accountants who never got to participate in a popularity contest before. Last year, we lost in the finals to Uncat in a tournament that was rife with scandal, but they just announced the 64 nominees or 32 nominees or however many it is. And wouldn't you know it, the entrant called, quote, Jason Stats / Jason Daly. We got more nominees than anybody else, gang. We beat out software companies, beat out literally everybody. And I can't tell you how that just makes my heart go pitter patter. You want to know how many popularity contests I've won in my life? Probably the same number as you if you're an accountant. The answer is not very many. That's not true. Fourth grade, I ran for treasurer, or was it third grade? This was an elected position within the elementary school. Came with a lot of responsibility. In the run up to the elections, there's one day where you're allowed to distribute this index card sized thing to students to convince them this is why you should vote for me. And at the time, my dad had this giant can of beer nuts, this giant beer nuts can full of pennies. Remember beer nuts? Are those still a thing? Man, those were delicious. He had this giant thing of pennies for some reason, and I'd been screwing around with them the same night that I was putting together my little index cards. And I was like, what if I just tape a bunch of pennies to these index cards? And so for every single one, I scotch taped 2 pennies to these index cards. I got them in these big plastic bags to go to school the next day. And my mom's like, what is that? And I was like, they're the things for the treasurer. She's like, you can't tape money to those, but we were headed out the door. I go to school, I distribute these things. It was controversial. People were not happy about it, but you know what? I won. Absolutely trounced the other person that was running. Not at all through any sort of level of popularity or merit or anything, just because people were like, oh, that's the guy that put money on the thing. He's the one that paid us to vote for him. They said, you can never do that again. I ran next year and I got absolutely smoked. It wasn't even, I was floating on a cloud. I thought, oh, we're going to cruise through this. Not a chance. But while I was in office, boy, I can just hear the people dropping off this podcast. While I was in office, they tasked like 3 or 4 of us with going through these brochures of different playground sets because it was time to replace the big old wood, like half rotten one that we had. And so we each went through and we like pieced together this play set, and then the entire school voted. And you better believe they picked mine. My brother lives by that elementary school, and every time we drive by, I say, look, kids, you see that faded pink playground that's been there for 25 years and needs to be replaced? Your dad built that. And they say, wow, really? And I say, not really. And my wife rolls her eyes. Okay. Eric Killian commented on a couple weeks back when we did the whole office setup review. What's my gear setup? He says, all this talk about setup, and honestly, we just love to see a behind the scenes photo of what your setup looks like when you're doing video versus when you're podcasting versus when you're working or writing. This way we can see where your monitors are, lighting, how far away the camera is to get that long lens look versus your other videos where it's more wide angle. I can tell you it's not pretty. I basically work in a video studio, which is wildly inconvenient. Right up here is a 48-inch dome light that's filling half of this room. For this shot right now, which is on a 55 millimeter lens, the camera is about 10 feet away from me. I have another one that's a narrower shot, and that's usually about 13 feet away from me when I shoot it. We just lost the last few people who were listening to the audio feed. Podcast listeners are like, this episode is a grind. I don't talk much about my setup anymore because honestly, it shouldn't really inform the setup of folks that are just starting out. Like the reality is like we use a cinema camera, we're using cinema lenses, equipment that is probably even overkill for what I do, but is like too fiddly and like overcomplicated for folks that are getting into this stuff. I enjoy it. Like I super geek on gear and like color grading and some aspects of cinematography. So I really enjoy that stuff, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend going down that rabbit hole unless it's something you really enjoy, because when you buy complex, hard to work stuff, it just gets in the way of doing more video. So for me, like, you know, being on my 1000th video, I'm honestly maybe not the best person to ask for advice on how to make your 10th video. Besides just optimize for repetitions, don't overthink it. When I was in your stage, in the place of like most accountants who haven't done a ton of video, man, I was shooting stuff off my laptop, off my webcam. Wasn't pretty, but it got a little bit better each time. And I would look for ways to like find low stakes ways to build it into my process. That was probably the best hack that I worked out. Like, how can I make a habit of making a video every day or a few every week or something like that? And before you know it, you're much more comfortable with it. But then when you're down the road and you're doing super cool stuff, let's geek on gear. Otherwise, I've got like C-stands going overhead. We use a hair light for the main channel videos, which is like a light that's above and behind me. I usually don't bother on the podcast. I've got a big paper backdrop behind me. Got this nice print of Steve over the shoulder. We've got the plant, which has been with us from the very beginning. I have a single monitor now on a single arm that I kind of swing out of the way when I'm shooting stuff. But the best setup is the one that will make you like shoot more. Even for me, there's a lot of resistance in just hitting record and starting. That's always the hardest part. And then when you get going, it gets easier. So like that's what you have to optimize for, is that human nature that makes it really hard to just start. Gang, this episode is sponsored in part by Accruer. Have you seen this one yet? We did a demo day on the main channel for it a few months back. So Accruer, all it does is it connects to your QuickBooks Online files. And whenever it sees like an expense or an invoice or anything like that, in the description, I think the phrasing is for period, like date to date, it will automatically post journal entries to accrue that revenue, that expense, that payroll journal entry even, to accrue that across periods. It will prorate it by like the number of days in a month. Even if you go in and you change that down the road, you change that description to a different date, it will update all those accrual journal entries. So if you've got clients doing contracts where that revenue gets recognized over, a year or two, a number of months, and you got a whole bunch of those going on at the same time, makes that super simple. If you got clients doing prepaid expenses and you actually track them, makes that super simple as well. The payroll journal thing was actually really cool to me because it will then figure it out based on the number of days in either period. It's all super smart. By a company called FinOptimal, they're building a whole bunch of these little kind of tools for public accountant folks like us. To check this one out, head over to accruer.com or check out the link in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Cloud Accountant Staffing. Y'all know I'm a big advocate of hiring offshore. One of the biggest changes I made in my firm, we transitioned a legacy firm from 100% onshore local hiring to 100% distributed US and then 100% distributed globally hiring. And honestly is the best thing we did. It virtually alleviated all of our hiring pains, completely changed how we thought about staffing projects and the type of work that we wanted to bring on. Because you know what? The folks we hired offshore, really freaking good. A lot of misconceptions around the type of people that you hire offshore because your enterprises will oftentimes use offshore folks for menial work. Absolutely not the case. There are tens of thousands of people working for Big Four accounting firms, offshore, outside the US. You can get folks that can do anything from tax to junior level stuff to super senior level stuff. But try to do that yourself, figure it all out yourself. That's gonna be hard, it's gonna be scary. Really good place to start. Cloud Accountant Staffing, they will hold your hand through that process. Their story is super simple. An accounting firm in the US hired a bunch of people in the Philippines, fell in love with them, but didn't fall in love with the fees they were having to pay to the staffing companies that were managing these employees. So they built their own solution, and now they're starting to pull other accountants in. I'd encourage you, a big tipping point for me was when I was I'm gonna stop being opinionated on this and just try to learn. And so I talked with other practitioners, I talked with some of the vendors that would help you get into offshoring. That really opened things up for me. So if you've been on the fence, I'd encourage you to at least learn about it. And if you start heading down that path, consider Cloud Accountant Staffing. I mentioned the other day, Jacob Oberlander, they schedule all of their work through the whole year. They don't work overtime. He followed through with a flex on Twitter, said, thanks for the name drop today. Here are our company-wide hours for the week. Jacob runs a tax firm, by the way. Got a redacted list of employees here. Total time for the week for these employees: 27 hours, 6 minutes, 36 hours, 12 minutes, 14 hours, 54 minutes, 41 hours, 41 minutes, 37 hours, 20 hours, 37 hours. I asked which was his, and he said he's the slacker with 27 hours. It can be done. I saw Logan talking on Twitter this week about how he thinks he's going to give tax clients two prices, basically a pre-deadline price and a post-deadline price. There's a whole bunch of different ways to try to game this, from cutoff deadlines and surge pricing and all these different things. I have become a purist. The only way to ultimately take complete control over your workflow is to have everyone bring their stuff in on a schedule and have everything go out the door on a schedule. Schedule when those tax returns go out the door. Every client gets a week. Maybe you organize them into 6 tranches throughout the year or something like that. Maybe you get as granular as everybody having a specific week, but regardless of the type of work that you do, whether you're in the US, whether you're a tax pro or not, the only solution to taking total control of your capacity is scheduling everything. It means you can work backwards to build in extra capacity, time for vacation, stuff like that, but you're fundamentally out of control until you take control of when people can give you things. As long as folks can operate on the understanding that they're going to give you some stuff and you're going to get to it as soon as you can, then you haven't truly taken control of that flow. And the reason most of us don't do this is because it's really hard to imagine getting there from where we are. You can buy into man, that sounds really nice. And if I started a firm from scratch tomorrow, I would totally do it. But how do I get from A to B? Gang, if you believe in it, then the next firm starts with that next client. We're always building our next firm. It is always happening. I don't buy into the whole if you're going to roll out a policy thing, you got to do it across 100% of your clients and it's really painful, but you got to do it. There's situations where you have to do that, but there's also situations where that's really high risk because I'm going to make decisions wrong sometimes. And if I do, I sure hope I didn't just force it down the throat of every single one of my clients. The way I build a better firm is one client at a time. Every new client coming in the door is a little baby that has no expectations of what it is like to work with you. And the upside of that is I can define a new reality for that client when they come in. If you go too crazy with that, it creates a mess because then you're doing different things for everyone, right? But if you want to start taking control of capacity, number one, never let another client in the door that doesn't have a scheduled intake date and a scheduled out the door date. You can do that. Step two, start looking at cross sections of your client base who would be amenable to this. Some are going to be easier than others, but I'm telling you, once you get to the point where you are scheduling that work and doing it in a planned, controlled, not scary way, you know what it feels like on the other side of that? It feels like an office job. It feels like coming in and working an 8 to 5. And because you're the boss, you get control over exactly what that looks like. But it gets you away from the flaming, deadline-driven panic that can be busy season. A question that came up over on the main channel, trying to find a offshore tax prep service, any that I'd recommend, having a hard time finding one. So to be clear, what this is a service where you come to this service and they will prepare a tax return for you to then review and file. So you're not going to them and working or getting 100% of a person's time. You're going to basically a firm, an offshore firm that does the prep work and manages turnover and trains all those people internally. So you are buying tax returns rather than going to like a staffing service and buying hours, of a person's time or 100% of a person's time. So how do you find a good service that will do this stuff for you? Man, it's tricky. And I actually steer clear of really doing things with offshore service providers, not people who work offshore, not recruiters or placement groups for offshore people like humans, but groups like offshore firms who will do work for your firm. Because in my experience, you can have two people go to work with the same group and one can have a phenomenal experience and the other can have an awful experience because of the people behind the scenes that are supporting them. And because of that, it makes it actually really hard to make a recommendation where you're going to have a high degree of trust that somebody will have a positive experience. Contrast this with software, where not everybody's going to love a given piece of software, but anyone, when they come into that tool, they're going to have the same experience, right? So if I'm going to recommend a piece of software or, do a sponsorship with a piece of software, I can have a high degree of trust there that the experience will be consistent, as opposed to an offshore group. That's really tricky. And scattershot. If you've got somebody that that has a great experience with a group, like pounce on it. That stuff's gold. There's upsides and downsides to working with groups as opposed to working with specific people. The upside of working with a group is they're managing turnover of the team and the training and all of that. And for that, you ultimately pay a markup. The cost of that group doing a month-end close for you or a tax return for you is ultimately going to be more than if you did your own staffing offshore and you hired those people either directly or like through kind of an intermediary. For me, I went to staffing groups when they were kind of the last line of defense or the last release valve when I really needed that work and I was willing to pay more for it. In a perfect world, I in my experience, I more methodically built a team of folks offshore. I trained them myself. That's generally going to be much more cost effective. And then I've got control over the process. But then you're still dealing with turnover, with managing people. If you really don't like that, especially if you're working with a premium type of client who's going to pay well enough to where you can totally afford to pay that offshore group to do that for you, then that may work just fine. For me, they were great to have around as a fallback. And so we would throw work to them on a regular basis. But if something went sideways, like a person got sick or a person left unexpectedly, having that group on standby to where we could throw a lot more work at them in a pinch, that's really valuable. If you're working with a good outsourcing group, feel free to share it in the comments below. Obviously, we've had a couple placement and staffing groups who've sponsored my content. I'm sure you've seen those names bumping around. I can tell you from my experience, what I did in my firm was I started with outsourcing groups. Then I went to just working with the people because that was more cost effective. But I still used a bit of those groups as a fallback. I never wanted to be one person away from disaster. Like I went through too many of those, had too many sleepless nights where I got to the point where it's like, we're making money. I don't need to like squeeze even more out of this and perpetually be at risk of giving myself a heart attack when somebody leaves or something goes sideways and not having a plan. This episode is sponsored in part by the fine folks at ShareFile. ShareFile, it is a secure, easy-to-use collaboration and workflow solution made to meet the needs of your accounting firm and their clients. The ShareFile for Accounting solution helps enhance client onboarding processes, organize document collection, and orchestrate secure document exchange. With document status visibility, automated emails, and e-signature capabilities, ShareFile makes for a more modern client experience. Because that stanky old client experience they have right now is not good enough. Stop emailing files back and forth. You're better than that. To learn more about how the ShareFile for Accounting solution can help increase your firm's workflow efficiency, security, and collaboration, go to sharefile.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more. This episode is sponsored in part by LiveFlow. You may have seen a recent main channel video or my newsletter where we showed how to build an AI chat assistant on top of a set of financial statements so that when you deliver them to a client, the client can chat with the financials. It's actually really interesting, really good at answering dumb, basic questions. What happened to my office expense this month? You know those questions. And actually a really compelling way of building cool AI stuff right now is using LiveFlow to sync data from QuickBooks to your Google Sheets, because Google Sheets has an entire ecosystem of stuff built around it already. All sorts of other tools you can plug into Google Sheets. And when those tools can then see all of your accounting file stuff, LiveFlow lets you push a whole bunch of the reports from QuickBooks, balance sheets, P&L, but also general ledgers, all of the detail you could possibly need. If you are looking for a really interesting way to make your firm stand out, particularly if your clients are the type of folks who are into AI right now, it's a really cool way to do it. Use LiveFlow to bridge that data to the spreadsheet, and then AI tooling to take it from there. And then use that spreadsheet either by uploading it to an AI tool or via integration, letting people then interact with that accounting information. Pretty cool. And if you're working with big clients like company groups, like I was doing before I got out of firm running, LiveFlow consolidation can actually roll up a whole bunch of those files and give you that reporting too. Imagine being able to chat with consolidated reporting. That's pretty darn cool. If you want to learn more about that one, check out the link to LiveFlow in the show notes. Okay, last, books. Man, I'm at my best when I'm making time to read a lot. Last month has been rough. I have not made progress on that. Hunta Baby. Hi, Jason. Hi, Hunta Baby. What books have you got stacked in the background? Any recommendations? I shall read them to you. Not the books, the titles. In descending vertical order. We got The Accountant Marketer, Karen Rayburn. You either just heard my chat with her yesterday or you're gonna hear it next Thursday. Production on this one's tight. We'll see if it gets out. Next, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. The Serious Guide to Joke Writing. I'm a total comedy dork. I love comedy stuff. Endless Referrals. Radical Candor. Candor. Kim Scott, this is a good one if you manage people. It's a great book for managing people in a more human way. The Innovator's Dilemma. Good, but not particularly relevant to small companies. Virtual Culture, highly recommend if you're still getting to grips with how to work with people in a distributed format, like remote hiring. Even if you're hiring people offshore, that's ultimately what it is you're building a remote firm. This was a good one. Also, Remote, book's just called Remote. It's from the guys behind the software Basecamp. Atomic Habits, James Clear. This one's just a must read. If I had to pick one in this stack, it's probably that one. More books. Grit by Angela Duckworth. We might actually talk about this one on Monday. It's leaf blower o'clock. I don't know if you can hear that. Switch, book on change management. I think we might actually spend a week on change management. I don't know. We're gonna do some change management stuff down the road because most accounting firms are just change management blocked. Who Moved My Cheese? Another book on change management. The Greatness Mindset. Unlock the power of your mind and live your best life today. That one I haven't read yet. Elon Musk's his biography. Actually, some really interesting takeaways in that one. How to Change by Katie Milkman. What a great last name. Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. Analog, a cyber dystopian noir. A couple of you just got really excited. And then Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal. This was a really fun read, just about finding ways to make everyday work more fun-filled. Favorite thing I've read in the last couple years, probably Atomic Habits. Favorite thing I've read in the last 3 months, probably Feel Good Productivity. That's where a lot of my thinking around how do we figure out how to love the process rather than what we're trying to get to? I know I've been talking about that a lot lately, and that's some of where that has come from, is that book. Also, just like my personal journey of what do you do when you get to a point that just exceeded all the goals that you had made, you know? When life just kind of goes in a direction where you're just super grateful, but then you also have like that need to be challenged and keep doing new things. And you realize, and it's a very privileged thing to be able to say, but you realize on the other side of exceeding your expectations that you still got to find a way to like make yourself be happy and fulfilled and be challenged and all that. And so it kind of brings you back to the Infinite Game is a book that talks about this quite a bit. But how can I find a game that I want to play until the end of time and I will love it and enjoy it for the game itself and the process of doing it, rather than fixating on some hypothetical future achievement as if at that point everything will stop and I will just be happy. Like, that's just not how the human brain works. Got any stuff you've read lately? Drop it in the comments if you've got something you're excited about. A lot of these books came from y'all recommendations from commenters here and on social media. But we'll probably do a deep dive into one of these every couple of weeks here, sharing kind of my favorite takeaways from them. I don't know about you. It's hard for me to commit to a book. Somebody has to like tell me about the book and get me pretty deep into it for me to be like, okay, I'm going to invest the time in doing it. So I'll do that with a few of my favorites. Thanks for coming and hanging this week. Appreciate y'all. We passed 200 episodes this week. How wild is that? What is there going to be to talk about? You can't talk about accounting firms every day. How is that a thing? I still have accountants tell me that. I had to run a rival dad through that at gymnastics practice this week. I tell you what, man, it's a bottomless pit. When you're an entrepreneur, like, your mind just never stops turning over everything about that business. And there's just always more, from how to better run the business to pick systems to manage people to like stop getting in my own way. Last week going through office setups was also the biggest, like from a metrics standpoint, the biggest week the podcast's ever had. So thanks y'all for coming and hanging and doing this, adding to the conversation. These Q&As are always my favorite day of the week because I get to it's closer to an interaction with everybody. Have a good weekend. If you're a tax pro, go touch some grass, man. Hey, bye.